It was just after 9 in the morning, on a quiet day, that still felt suspended between the end of the holidays and the return of normal life. The house was unusually silent, the kind of silence that settles only when routines have not yet restarted. I stood in my kitchen, wearing a robe, slowly stirring cream into my coffee, enjoying the brief calm before the day demanded attention. The steam rose gently, fogging my glasses, and for a moment, everything felt steady and ordinary. Then my phone lit up on the counter. A new message notification appeared, and I recognized the name instantly. It was from my older sister. Even before opening it, something tightened in my chest, an instinctive pause that made my hand stop mid-stir. I unlocked the phone and read the message once, then again, as if repetition might soften its meaning. Exactly. The house is mine now. You are not welcome this Christmas. The words sat there, stark and final, offering no room for misunderstanding. There was no greeting, no explanation, no hint of humor, just a declaration that felt more like a verdict. Before I could even process the shock, reactions began to appear beneath the message. My father had pressed the like button. Almost immediately after, my mother replied with a simple line, "This Christmas will be wonderful." That was all it took. No argument, no defense, no attempt to soften the blow. Just confirmation. The coffee on the counter began to cool. Forgotten, while I stared at the screen. Only 4 days earlier, I had wired the final payment that cleared the remaining mortgage on the family home. Months of consistent transfers from my savings had finally paid off the loan completely. The house, once under threat of foreclosure, was now owned free and clear because I stepped in when no one else could. I remembered the relief I felt when the bank confirmation came through, the quiet pride in knowing I had protected something that mattered to all of us. I imagined family dinners, holidays, and the comfort of knowing my parents was secure. Now, standing alone in my kitchen, that sense of shared purpose evaporated in seconds. I did not respond. I did not type a message filled with questions or anger. I did not call anyone to demand an explanation. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the counter, as if distancing myself from it might lessen the impact. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the warmth fade, and stared at the surface of the coffee. Something inside me shifted, subtle but undeniable. It was not immediate rage or grief, but a slow, sinking realization that the place I thought I held in my family was not what I believed it to be. Memories rushed in uninvited. Holiday mornings filled with noise and laughter. Shared meals, familiar arguments that always ended in reconciliation. I had always assumed those moments were built on mutual care and unspoken loyalty. That assumption cracked quietly in that kitchen. The message was not just about Christmas. It was about belonging. It was about being told, without discussion, that my role had ended the moment my usefulness was no longer needed. The silence around me grew heavier. The house I stood in felt different, smaller somehow, as if the walls had shifted inward. I realized that the warmth I associated with family gatherings was not guaranteed. It was conditional, fragile, and easily withdrawn. That understanding hurt more than the message itself. The text did not simply uninvite me from a holiday. It exposed a truth I had avoided for months, maybe years. As I finally poured the untouched coffee down the sink, I understood that this message marked a beginning rather than an ending. It was the moment when denial became impossible, when loyalty met reality. Whatever came next would be shaped by this realization, by the knowledge that generosity without boundaries can quietly rewrite relationships. The day moved forward as it always does, but something fundamental had changed, and there was no going back to the comfort I once believed was permanent. When the call first came, it did not sound like manipulation or entitlement. It sounded like fear. My sister's voice carried a strain I had never heard before, a mix of exhaustion and uncertainty that immediately triggered my instinct to step in. She spoke about layoffs at her job, about sudden income loss, and about the pressure of trying to hold a household together with 2 young children depending on her. Each sentence landed carefully, not dramatic, just heavy enough to feel real. By the time she mentioned the mortgage, My mind was already calculating numbers, weighing risks, and looking for solutions. Helping felt natural, almost automatic, because family was supposed to mean showing up when things fell apart. I had spent years building my own stability from the ground up. I worked steadily, saved aggressively, and avoided unnecessary risks. Independence had always been my quiet source of pride. I paid my own way through adulthood and learned to find security in planning ahead rather than relying on anyone else. That financial cushion represented long hours, missed indulgences, and discipline that few people ever noticed. When I agreed to help, I did not see it as sacrifice. I saw it as temporarily sharing the safety I had earned, believing it would protect everyone involved without costing me more than money. The arrangement began simply. I set up automatic payments directly to the lender, ensuring the mortgage stayed current. Each transfer felt purposeful, like placing another brick in a wall meant to keep disaster out. Statements arrived monthly, and I watched the balance drop little by little. My sister sent occasional messages filled with gratitude, promising it would not be forever. My parents expressed relief, telling me how proud they were. Their words reinforced the idea that I was doing the right thing, that my support mattered and would be remembered. In those early months, I felt useful, valued, and included. What I did not account for was the slow erosion that happens when giving becomes expected. The payments continued, and with each one, the dynamic shifted almost imperceptibly. My role quietly changed from helper to provider. No one asked how it affected me. No one checked whether the ongoing support strained my own plans or sense of security. The assumptions settled in that I could manage, that I always would. I told myself it was fine, that families lean on each other and balance returns over time. Yet something inside me began to tighten with each transfer. I worked longer hours to compensate, taking on extra projects and delaying personal goals I once considered non-negotiable. Trips were postponed, purchases reconsidered, and rest became optional. I minimized my own needs because the situation felt bigger than me. Any discomfort I felt seemed selfish compared to the fear of my family losing their home. That internal negotiation repeated itself every month, slowly teaching me that my well-being ranked lower than everyone else's stability. As time passed, appreciation faded into normalcy. The payments were no longer remarkable. They were simply assumed. Conversations shifted away from gratitude toward plans and improvements that did not include me. I noticed it, but brushed it aside, convincing myself that my contribution spoke for itself. Deep down, though, a quiet imbalance grew. I was pouring resources into something that no longer felt shared, while my own sense of belonging thinned. Helping my family cost more than the money I sent. It cost clarity, boundaries, and eventually, trust. I gave without structure, believing intention was enough to protect me. Instead, it left me exposed. By the time I realized how much of myself I had traded away in the name of loyalty, the emotional weight felt heavier than any financial loss. What started as support gradually became self-erasure, and I did not see it until there was very little of me left in the equation. In the beginning, gratitude came easily and openly. My sister's messages were warm, often arriving late at night or early in the morning, thanking me for keeping things stable when everything felt uncertain. My parents echoed that appreciation during our calls, their voices lighter now that the threat of losing the house had receded. They spoke as though my involvement was a blessing that had arrived at the right moment. And for a while, I believed that was how it would remain. Those expressions of thanks reassured me that my effort mattered, that my role in the family was secure and respected. As the months passed, the tone shifted in ways that were subtle enough to dismiss at first. Gratitude no longer needed to be voiced because stability had become the norm. The crisis had passed, and with it, the urgency that once centered me in conversations. Instead of updates about interviews or financial struggles, I began seeing casual mentions of home improvements and social gatherings. The house was no longer described as something we were saving together. It became something they were building and enjoying. I watched from a distance, telling myself this was a natural progression. That relief would eventually replace appreciation once life settled. Social media made the change impossible to ignore. Photos appeared of freshly painted walls, rearranged furniture, and backyard gatherings filled with laughter. Captions spoke about new beginnings and forever homes. Each post carried an unspoken claim, a sense of ownership that did not include me. I scrolled through them with a growing unease, recognizing rooms I had helped preserve, but feeling like a guest looking in from the outside. I never commented with anything more than polite approval, unsure how to express the quiet disconnect forming beneath the surface. Conversations with my parents reflected the same shift. During family calls, praise flowed toward my sister for managing everything so well. They admired her resilience, her ability to keep the household running, her dedication to making the home feel alive again. I listened as my contributions went unmentioned, not because I needed constant recognition, but because the absence felt deliberate. My role faded into the background. Reduced to a chapter, everyone seemed eager to close. When I spoke, the energy changed slightly, as though my presence interrupted a narrative already moving forward without me. Invitations became less frequent, then stopped altogether. I learned about gatherings after they had happened, usually through photos or offhand remarks. At first, I assumed it was oversight or busy schedules. Families grow complicated. I told myself, life pulls people in different directions, but the pattern repeated too consistently to ignore. Holidays were planned without my input. Weekends passed with no calls or messages. Even the group chat that once buzzed with daily updates went quiet on my end. Conversations continuing without my inclusion. I tried to address it gently, reaching out with casual questions or suggestions to meet up. The responses were polite but noncommittal, often redirecting the conversation elsewhere. No one confronted me or explained the distance. Instead, the exclusion unfolded quietly, wrapped in normalcy and silence. That made it harder to challenge, harder to name without sounding dramatic. Yet the effect was unmistakable. I was being edged out, not through conflict, but through omission. What hurt most was not the lack of thanks, but the realization that appreciation had been conditional. It existed when my support was essential, and vanished once it was no longer needed. I began to see how easily gratitude can transform into entitlement when boundaries are absent. The family dynamic had rewritten itself, positioning me as a resource rather than a person. By the time I fully understood what was happening, the sense of belonging I once felt had already been replaced by distance, leaving me to confront the quiet truth that generosity does not always secure a place in someone else's life. The truth did not arrive through confrontation or confession. It surfaced quietly, buried in numbers, dates, and official language that carried no emotion at all. One evening, out of nothing more than habit, I logged into an old joint bank account that had once been used for shared household expenses. I had not checked it in months, assuming it remained dormant. As the page loaded, a list of recent transactions appeared, and something immediately felt off. Small withdrawals, spaced out over time, dotted the statement. Individually, they looked insignificant, easy to overlook. Together, they formed a pattern that tightened my chest as I scrolled further back. I checked the totals twice, then a third time, my pulse quickening as the math became undeniable. Thousands of dollars had been pulled without my knowledge. There were no messages, no explanations, no warnings, just clean digital records showing money leaving an account I thought was untouched. The room felt suddenly colder as realization began to settle. This was not forgetfulness or error. It was deliberate. Whoever authorized those withdrawals understood exactly how to keep them quiet. Memory filled in the gaps next. I remembered the moment my sister had suggested I sign a limited power of attorney months earlier. She had framed it as a convenience, a practical step in case I was ever unavailable while bills needed handling. At the time, it sounded reasonable. I trusted her, and trust has a way of lowering defenses. The document arrived by email, already prepared, and I signed it without hesitation, barely skimming the fine print. Now, staring at the account activity. I understood how that trust had been leveraged. The next step felt mechanical, driven more by instinct than emotion. I accessed the county property records online, typing in the familiar address of the house I had helped save. The result loaded quickly, listing ownership details in black and white. My breath caught as I read the names. Only my sister and her husband appeared as legal owners. A recent title update had been processed, quietly and efficiently, without any notice to me. There was no ambiguity, no shared stake, no mention of my involvement. The paper trail was clear. The house I had paid for no longer included me in any form. I sat there for a long time, documents open across my screen, piecing together the timeline, the withdrawals, the power of attorney, the title change, all aligned with my payment history. The support I believed was temporary had been transformed into leverage. What I once viewed as help was now framed legally as a gift, stripped of expectation or claim. The betrayal was not emotional in that moment. It was structural. Systems had been used, signatures exploited, and assumptions turned against me. What made the discovery harder to absorb was how impersonal it all was. There were no raised voices or dramatic confrontations, just forms, approvals, and recorded filings, the kind of actions that carry weight precisely because they leave no room for interpretation. Each document reinforced the same conclusion. My role had been erased on paper long before I felt it emotionally. The exclusion I sensed socially now had a legal counterpart. As I gathered the evidence, a new clarity emerged. This was no misunderstanding. It was intentional design. Paperwork does not lie, and it rarely moves without direction. The truth had been hidden not because it was complicated, but because it was inconvenient. It relied on my assumption that family loyalty would protect me from exploitation. That assumption dissolved with every page I reviewed. In that moment, the story stopped being about feelings and became about facts. And facts, once uncovered, demand action, whether or not anyone is ready to face the consequences. Once the truth was laid bare in black and white, the situation transformed from a painful family betrayal into a problem that demanded clear, decisive action. The discoveries I had made unauthorized withdrawals, the power of attorney misused, and the house title quietly transferred were not abstract grievances. They were concrete violations with legal remedies. The emotional weight of betrayal remained, but it was now accompanied by clarity. The path forward required the law, not argument or persuasion. I realized that taking back control meant treating the situation like any other high-stakes financial dispute, not like a family disagreement that could be solved with discussion alone. The first step was to find the right professional guidance. I reached out to a trusted friend, someone who had a keen understanding of both family dynamics and practical solutions, and explained the situation in detail. Her response was firm and unflinching. I had been taken advantage of, and the only way to protect myself was to act quickly and decisively. She recommended a real estate lawyer she had worked with, someone who specialized in property disputes and could navigate the complex combination of gift deeds, title transfers, and financial misuse. I scheduled a meeting immediately, gathering every scrap of documentation I had collected. Sitting in the lawyer's office the next day, I spread the evidence across the desk: bank statements, mortgage payoff confirmations, correspondence with my sister, and the county records showing the title change. The room was quiet, the hum of office activity outside a stark contrast to the tension in the papers before me. My lawyer, Mr. Finch, reviewed each item meticulously, explaining not just what the documents revealed, but how the law interpreted them. He highlighted the fact that the gift deed was revocable under Indiana law because no unconditional transfer had been formalized. He noted the unauthorized use of the power of attorney, a clear breach that could be challenged. Step by step, he outlined a plan: terminate the existing power of attorney, file a quiet title action to reclaim my interest, and assemble a comprehensive case showing manipulation and financial diversion. Following his guidance, I also engaged a financial investigator to trace every dollar I had contributed. Landon Wells, The investigator pulled detailed reports that mapped the flow of funds from my accounts to theirs, including the post-payoff use of my contributions for personal spending rather than mortgage reduction. His findings provided the independent verification needed to strengthen my legal position. The combination of legal review and financial mapping transformed my emotional frustration into actionable evidence. Each document, each timeline, each verified transaction became a building block of my case. I moved quickly to safeguard my own finances, halting all automatic payments, freezing access to joint accounts, and changing passwords on previously shared systems. These steps created a clear separation, ensuring that no further leverage could be exercised against me while the legal proceedings moved forward. Every decision I made was deliberate, focused on containment and preparation. The emotional drain of betrayal was mitigated by the structure of the process steps I could follow, milestones I could check off, evidence I could compile. As filings were submitted and timelines documented, I began to feel a sense of empowerment that had been absent since the betrayal first unfolded. The law provided structure, rules, and accountability. What had seemed like a personal failure to recognize the shift in family loyalty was now a matter of clear rights and responsibilities. Through careful preparation, professional guidance, and strategic action, I reclaimed control not through confrontation or resentment, but through legitimate, enforceable channels. Each step forward reminded me that boundaries, when supported by law and evidence, are not only protective, they are decisive. By approaching the situation systematically, I transformed helplessness into authority. The emotional chaos that had dominated the past months now had a framework for resolution. The law became not a weapon of vengeance, but a tool of restoration, a means to reclaim what I had earned while preserving my integrity. In the midst of betrayal, documentation, filings, and legal processes became the foundation upon which I rebuilt both my property and my personal sovereignty, demonstrating that control, once surrendered, can be regained through careful, deliberate action. The confrontation, the legal battles, and the eventual resolution brought with them a clarity I had not experienced in years. For so long, my identity within the family had been defined by obligation, by the quiet expectation that my resources and energy were available whenever needed. I had poured myself into preserving the home, paying off the mortgage, and covering financial gaps, all under the assumption that loyalty and love guaranteed my place. But the events that followed proved otherwise. The lessons were hard, the costs high, but they were necessary. From the chaos of betrayal emerged a new perspective. Boundaries were not rejection, they were protection, and freedom was the reward for recognizing their importance. Once the house was sold and the proceeds secured in a trust under my sole control, I felt an immediate sense of relief. For the first time in years, my finances were fully my own. No transfers, no requests, no unspoken expectations waited in the wings. The autonomy I had sacrificed to support others now returned with tangible force, and with it came the ability to plan life on my own terms. The condo I moved into downtown reflected that change, a space chosen for function, comfort, and personal taste, not convenience for anyone else or nostalgic attachment to shared history. The rooms were mine, the routines mine, the choices mine. Decorating, cooking, and planning weekends became exercises in self-expression rather than obligation. Alongside the physical freedom came emotional liberation. Weekends were no longer punctuated by subtle exclusion or indirect expectations. The constant tension of trying to anticipate needs, to provide without overstepping, was gone. I could say no without guilt, decline invitations without second-guessing, and engage with family and friends on my own terms. That shift in control reshaped how I experienced relationships. Social interactions were no longer a minefield of hidden obligations, but spaces where I could be present fully. Not strategically, peace began to replace the quiet anxiety that had shadowed every decision tied to shared family resources. The process also allowed me to reflect on the meaning of generosity and support. I realized that giving without structure, even when motivated by care, often leads to imbalance and resentment. True generosity, I discovered, requires clarity and limits. The house payments had been an act of love and protection, but without defined boundaries. That love became invisible and, ultimately, exploited. Recognizing this pattern early and enforcing limits is not selfish. It is essential for long-term well-being. Establishing boundaries allowed me to give selectively and intentionally, rather than endlessly and unconsciously, preserving both relationships and personal integrity. Rebuilding my life also involved cultivating new routines and interests that reinforced my independence. I joined a book club, participated in cooking classes, and embraced hobbies that had been sidelined by years of quiet overcommitment. These activities were more than leisure. They were affirmations of identity, avenues for connection outside family obligations, and reminders that I could thrive on my own terms. The combination of structure, autonomy, and self-expression gradually strengthened my confidence, proving that reclaiming control was not just about property or money, it was about life. Perhaps the most profound realization was the value of self-respect. Family ties are important, but they do not require the sacrifice of personal security, peace, or dignity. By protecting myself, I also preserve the possibility of future healthy relationships. Freedom and boundaries are inseparable. One cannot exist without the other. They create space for authentic connection and prevent the slow erosion that comes when generosity is met with entitlement. In claiming this space, I discovered not only relief from past pressures, but also the excitement of new beginnings. Life could be rebuilt thoughtfully, deliberately, and fully on my terms, without fear, without manipulation, and with a renewed sense of purpose. In the quiet moments of my new life, I finally understood that self-care is not selfish, and limits are not rejection. They are essential acts of preservation that make room for growth, joy, and meaningful connection. The experiences that once left me exhausted and excluded now serve as a foundation for freedom, a framework for choice, and a reminder that beginnings are often disguised as endings. With boundaries firmly in place, I was free to live fully, authentically, and without compromise.